urban mobility, are we doing it for the gram or are we doing it for the gran? So I will let him unpack that for you. Mayor Nenshi, thank you so much.
Well, thanks very much, Greg, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for getting up early. Thanks for coming in for a conversation that might be a little bit different than some of the conversations that we have been having around the future of urban mobility. Because what I really want to do with all of you this morning is perhaps get less excited about the potential of technology and the potential of change, and really refocus ourselves on why mobility matters and why it matters for people who live within our communities. So, as Greg pointed out, are we doing it for the gram or are we doing it for grandma? Are we doing it for the cool, hip factor of having e-scooters in our community? Or are we doing it because we're really focused on very important issues that people who live in our communities face? So let's start with the facts. For the first time in human history, right now, we live in a world where more people live in cities than do not. The first time in human history that humanity is an urban species. And that rate of urbanization across the world is only going to grow. When you think about Canada, if you think about Canada, you will think of vast open spaces, you'll think of beautiful mountains, you'll think of bears, moose, all of those things we have in abundance. But 80% of Canadians live in cities. And so even last night, I had someone say to me, I was just in Calgary last week, and I said, what was your favorite part? And he said, Lake Louise and the mountains. And I said, were you in Calgary at all? And he said, well, the airport. So we do have to get people to Lake Louise and the mountains a bit better. But we also need to think about why and how people move through their own communities. So let me tell you a little bit about where I live. Calgary is a place that has been settled for many thousands of years. The reason people live in that valley, the reason people live in that place in the foot of the Rocky Mountains, is because two rivers meet there. The Blackfoot people call the area Mokinstis, the elbow. And we call those rivers today the Bow River and the Elbow River. Yes, I know that's funny. And they meet right near City Hall, where I go to work every single day. And I often think about the fact that that's why there's human habitation on this land, because it's a semi-arid region. It doesn't rain or snow very much. So people were drawn to that land because of the life-giving powers of the water. The water served to transport goods and people. It served as a gathering place for wildlife. And it created a place where people hunt and fish and trade and live and love and fight sometimes. Sounds like my last council meeting, minus the love part. But ultimately engage in that very human act of building community. Now, every single city, every single new mayor, every single new city council always goes through a process of strategic planning. And they always work really hard for months or years on developing what the outcomes of the city need to be. Here's the secret. They always come up with the same 5 things, no matter what. You need a city, and this is how we say it in Calgary. You need a healthy and a green city. You need a city of safe and inspiring neighborhoods. You need a prosperous city where there's economic growth. You need a well-run city where government does a good job. And you need a city that moves. You need to help people get around to where they need to be and participate in the life of the city. And when we think about mobility, and when we think about everything that's happening in mobility, we start by going, well, you know, most people who live in cities manage to get to work or to school. They manage to get to the store. They manage to get their kids off to school. They manage to get around. So I think it's important for us to start with an important question, which is, what problem are we trying to solve? What can new mobility and mobility innovations do to improve life in our communities? I have nearly 16,000 colleagues who work with me at the City of Calgary. They clean our streets, they drive our buses, they give us a gift that 1 billion people in the world don't have, which is the gift of safe, clean drinking water every day. They look after our green spaces. They teach our kids how to swim. They're the first on the scene in an emergency. They're the voice on the other end of the line when you make the most terrifying phone call of your life. And they work hard every single day to make the community better. And I always tell them, every single one of my colleagues, you should ask yourself the same question multiple times a day. And I'm going to suggest to all of you who are working in the mobility space, whether you're in government or you're in the private sector, to do the same thing. Ask yourself this question multiple times a day. How is what I am doing right now making somebody's life better? How is what I am doing right now making it easier and better for someone to live here? All over the city of Calgary, in every water cooler and every elevator, there's a big sign that says, making life better every day. And fundamentally, I think that's the job of all of us as human beings, to make life better. So what are some of those problems that we need to solve? Well, there's congestion, for one. There's robbing people of the quality of their life because they're stuck in traffic. By the way, have you ever noticed, how many of you have said in the last week, oh gosh, I'm stuck in traffic? How many of you said in the last week, oh gosh, I am traffic? Congestion is a problem, and it's a problem that we don't personalize. If only we could get other people off the road. Climate change is a significant problem that cannot be looked at in isolation, because we need to actually determine how we can help people live prosperous lifestyles while stewarding the future of this planet. How do we do both of those things at once? And how do we make sure that we don't make terrible errors in fixing climate change problems or emissions problems over here by causing much bigger emissions problems over here? These are the things we've got to think through. What about social and physical isolation? If people can't get around their communities, then how can they feel that they are truly participating within those communities? So making it more specific to mobility problems, we can think of at least 3 areas in which our systems don't work well. The first is the last mile problem. What do we do to get people from our transit hubs and our mobility spines to where they actually need to go? And how can we do that in a way that is efficient, that is cost-effective for government, and that is convenient for people? As populations age, issues of transportation for people with more limited mobility and perhaps the ability, losing the ability to drive become more important. So how do we think about paratransit, traditional paratransit, or new ways of helping people who are less mobile get around and participate in their city? What about access to mobility for lower income people? How do we ensure that everyone has the opportunity to participate in their community without riding on an $8 scooter ride? And of course, in an era of constrained government budgets, cost, and did I mention cost, are the sorts of things that we really need to think through. So how have we tried to approach that in my own community? You know, when I was first elected mayor 9 years ago, one of the first things I did was create the city's first ever 30-year strategic plan for transit. We'd never had one before. If federal or provincial funding became available for transit, we'd kind of look across a suite of projects and go, the amount of money kind of matches the amount that's needed for that project, we'll build that one. And what we were able to do was develop a 3-decade-long plan saying, how can we move the most amount of people the most safely and the most conveniently? And by the way, it started with a major slap-your-head insight. Are you ready? Public transit should get people where they want to go. Sounds funny, right? But too many of our transit routes are built to optimize the route. They're built in hub and spoke models to come into the center city and go out again. They're not getting people directly from where students live to where universities are, and so on and so on. So our new plan uses a system of bus rapid and light rail transit together to try and get people where they want to go. The last mile problem is a very serious one. How can we use technology, including things like rideshare and new modes of transportation, to get people from the train station to their house? How do you do that in a cold weather city? How do you do that in a place where Car2Go with 130,000 members has left with a month's notice? These are all important questions that we have to really work through and figure out together. What is the future of autonomy? You know, I had the opportunity once to sit in a room. I'm a bit like Forrest Gump. I always end up in rooms that I probably shouldn't be in. But I sat in a very small room with all of the senior leaders in the global automotive industry in a room with the senior leaders of various large disruptors that you've probably heard of or used the services of. And they were talking about autonomy. And they had spent billions of dollars in thinking about solving the engineering problems around autonomy. They had not spent 1 minute thinking about the public policy issues related to autonomy. So I said, and maybe that was why I was in the room, what happens if the public regulator, in the interest of safety, says there has to be a manual backup system and you have to have a licensed driver in the car? Completely changes your usage models. Completely changes your massive increased demand curves that are driving the investment in autonomy. Let's say the policymaker says, no, you can have a car without a driver in it. What does that do to how we use our cities? Does that mean we solve my problem with seniors and limited mobility because they'll have their own car, or they'll have a car as a service, but now they're driving everywhere? Parents who are worried about their kids walking to school will find it easier for their kids to be driven to school by the car. People might try to avoid the cost of high parking downtown by having their car drive itself home. So what does that mean? Massive induced demand. Massive increase in the number of vehicle kilometers traveled, and things like lane reversals on streets going into center cores and coming out won't work anymore because you've induced demand going in the reverse direction during peak periods. So yeah, we'll have much better usage of our networks. We'll have more cars being able to use existing roads, but people's commutes will become longer and longer. And if one of our problems with congestion is we're robbing people's quality of life because they're stuck in traffic, now we're robbing people's quality of life because their commutes are much, much longer. And no matter what Wi-Fi you got or what Netflix shows you can watch on that commute, you're still not with your kids. So these are problematic things that together we have to be able to figure out. So ultimately, e-scooters are super fun. My sister went over the handlebars on her first ride, 5 stitches and a concussion. She says they're a menace to society. But here's the thing, people love them. Are they taking cars off the road? No. Are they replacing pedestrian trips with scooter trips in my city? Probably. Are they super fun? Yes. Do they get people out and about in the community in a way that is really neat because they're at street level and interacting with local businesses? Absolutely. So there are wonderful benefits, but there are also significant challenges. I want to end here by telling you about the single most important thing that I think that we've done in public transit at the City of Calgary. Yes, we're making the largest investments in transit in our history. We're building a $4.5 billion LRT line. We built out an entire model of BRT lines. By the way, actually I'll end with that. I'll come back to that. But the most important thing we did was we created a sliding scale system for when you buy your bus pass based on your income. So if you're very, very, very poor, then you can ride transit unlimited instead of for $106 a month, for $5 a month. We did that a year and a half ago. In that time, 63,000 people have qualified for the low-income bus pass. That's in a city of 1.3 million. 63,000 people. And what we learned was that there was a huge group of our neighbors who we didn't even know about, who were trapped in their neighborhoods or in their homes, who were not participating in the city because they couldn't afford to. And what the low-income transit pass has given them is freedom. Freedom to be able to go to school, to go to work, to not worry about whether they ride the train without a ticket and they get caught and they get a ticket and that ruins their entire finances for the next 3 months, or they never pay it and there's a warrant out for them. It takes away that fear, that constant fear that they're living with every day. And it comes back to the original question of why do we do this? The best $6 million we've spent at the city. in terms of helping people deal with this. Investments in mobility are really important. They're environmental investments, they're investments in quality of life, but mostly they're investments in social mobility. And I think that's critical. So a year ago, I was asked to participate in writing a letter to be sealed in a time capsule, to be open 50 years from now. And in that letter, I said, we're making a bunch of big bets. You, people of 50 years from now, will be able to tell us whether we did it right or wrong. We're making a bunch of bets on the use of transit. We're making a bunch of bets on how people live and work and shop and play in communities. We're making the biggest financial bet of our history by doubling our LRT network. We're making bets that human beings, regardless of what technology does over the next 50 years, will always want to be in places where they can live and work together. So I ask all of you, as you do your wonderful work in mobility, oh, and I'll be in big trouble if I don't say the next bit. Calgary is a hive for innovation. It's the best place to live. The Economist calls it the best place to live, not just in North America, in the entire Western Hemisphere. Grow in Calgary, do your work in Calgary. My colleague Luke and I are here. We'll give you business cards. We'll tell you what to do. That was my very, very short pitch. I do have a much better one. Great talent, great cost of living, incredible quality of life. But what I want all of you to think about, what are you writing in your time capsule? How is the work that you are doing today making life better today and in the future for everyone? Thank you for all you do.